Oh, it's a good.
That was great, James.
What?
Great start.
That was awful. God, I'm still in 2020 mode. Folks, it's 2021. It's good to be back. That's what I was trying to get out, but I couldn't. Fuck. We're off to a rough start. Something got out. Not what I wanted. Folks, welcome back. Weekly webinar. Dr. Mike, Dr. James. We're apart this time, but we're still together spiritually, sexually, sometimes. I don't know where this is going. Why don't we answer some questions?
Yes to all. First question comes in from Zenith.
The TV maker?
Yeah.
Dude, remember
Stop
those,
making TVs. Start asking our personal questions. Oh, yeah.
Ooh, 52 likes or upvotes.
Yeah, people really wanted to know. Why does lifting weights burn so few calories? I thought repairing muscle damage, healing muscle soreness, replenishing fuel stores like glycogen and creatine would have a caloric expenditure similar to cardio. That caloric expenditure, okay. That and sometimes workouts can raise your heart rate, leave you out of breath and sweating, but it seems that it's not even close to burning as much calories as a brisk walk. Edit, thanks for your time, friendly Russian bull and manlier Paul Bunyan.
That was very flattering.
So the easiest way to answer this question is the following. Two-part answer from me. Physically displacing objects is considerably more energetically laborious than performing microscopic chemical reactions, which is why moving around costs much more energy than like having to heal something or something like that, which is an intricate process. It doesn't move a huge volume of energy around. It just has to happen slowly because it's very intricate. Part one. Part two, when you're doing cardio, it's depending on the nomenclature you use or the taxonomy you use, it's called a cyclic activity, which is lifting weights is acyclic. The easiest way to answer that is part two is if you track the amount of time you're actually lifting weights, it's very little. It may be, I know this sounds scary, but it may be 20 minutes per 2-hour workout. Okay. And then it's like, yeah, for those 20 minutes, you burned a shitload of calories, but you sat around for the rest of the time. So if aliens watch like a weightlifting team, it'd be like, so what do you guys think they're doing? They're like, well, they're mostly sitting. They're like, that's true. They are mostly sitting.
But they're getting more fit from sitting.
Right, exactly. They're like, these are the sitting team again. You're like, yes, it's the sitting team.
The sitting team.
So because they do way more sitting than weightlifting, they're like, occasionally there's weightlifting thing, but that seems uninteresting as it's not the majority of the time. So in cardio, you keep moving and movement costs a huge amount of energy. This is illustrated in something like transportation even. This is applicable not just to human systems. The amount of energy it takes to move a plane full of people from London to New York is fucking ridiculous. And I think last I checked, it's mathematically more energy than 100% efficient solar panels the size of a plane could absorb from the sun. So like solar powered flight in an airliner is physically impossible. Like you just need higher density fuel. So that really is the answer. And I wish it weren't so, because it wouldn't be great if you could lift weights 4 times a week and burn thousands of calories. It's just not the case. James?
Yeah, and this is actually pretty well documented in exercise science for most high intensity types of exercise, including like high intensity cardio, and weights would fall into the same general idea of just like high intensity intermittent exercise. And what you find is that, yeah, you do actually have a big energy output. You're just not doing that much total exercise, as Dr. Mike said. And one thing to keep in mind tying into your question, and this is really well demonstrated if you look at the high intensity interval training research, the actual amount of energy that you burn while you're working out is like not that much. It's okay. But you actually do get a substantial amount afterwards, which they typically don't measure in resistance training stuff at all. So what we find is that if you do something like a HIIT style program, you burn some calories while you work out, but you actually are still burning a lot of calories after you work out as you are kind of coming down, and as a result of some of like the recovery adaptive systems, just from using more energy to recover from the increased disruption of that intense exercise. So yeah, that is true to some extent. And some of that you would see later and wouldn't be measured like in a study of like, okay, here's how many calories you burn during a weight training session. Because all that's measuring is from start to finish of the session, not kind of the downstream things that happen later on. So there are downstream things, but as Dr. Mike said, they just don't account for that much, that many calories compared to just doing like steady state exercise. So yeah. It is there. And I would encourage you, if you're really interested in that topic, look at the metabolic and calorie stuff on high intensity interval training, and you'll see kind of what we're talking about, because that does exist. So what you're thinking is right on track in terms of like, weight training fucks you up a lot more. Why doesn't it burn more calories? It does later, just not while you're doing it.
And it doesn't burn as many as you think because healing just doesn't require as much energy as physically moving. Think about it this way. When you take your arm and you lift it like this, you've moved every molecule in your arm like a huge distance. When you're healing tissues, most of the molecules there aren't being powered to go anywhere. It's just a few little small intricate ones, and it's tiny tissues. So at the end of the day, like, it's just not like a great example is like how long, like how much energy does it take for mechanics to fix a plane once it's landed versus how much does it take to fly a plane? Fuck! But all they have to do is turn on the lights in the warehouse and power their little drills. Like, it's just really not that much. Whereas an airplane flying, you guys have heard the engine when you're on the plane. It's like, you're like, wow, that's for 8 hours it does that. Like, yeah, it's way more. So, all right. Next up is Heinrich Andersen.
Got it.
From somewhere in the north. Oh, does he address his naming? No, he doesn't. We'll see if we can keep making fun of his name for no good goddamn reason and he gets pissed and addresses how you actually pronounce it. So he says, as Mike has stated many times, every mesocycle should start at MEV. For most muscle groups, I agree. However, some muscle groups never get sore and tolerate very high volumes. For example, delts in most cases, more volume equals... For example, delts. In most cases, more volume equals more muscle growth. Therefore, my question is, why not start the mesocycle above MEV and end at MRV as opposed to going from MEV to MRV? Because, he goes, edit. Another commentator at Hey Now replied with, you start an MEV to get some easy gains with a little effort relative to others. He goes, yes, I've heard Dr. Mike mention this before, but Mike also says that muscle grows X amount after every workout. So doesn't more volume equal more growth? Well, more volume can equal more growth to a point, but you also have to include the fatigue cost. It's not just what you grow this session, is how much fatigue does this session contribute to the next one, and how many sessions can you string in a row that are growing something. So if you start at close to MEV and go to MEV average and then go all the way to MRV, you're getting the entire spectrum of really good growth, and you're not eliminating the bottom part, which is arguably the one with the best stimulus to fatigue ratio. Now, it's not the one with the best total yield, but you definitely can't just scratch it off the list without really explaining some shit. James and I always say, if you start above MEV, you'd have to have a real good reason to do that. So if you are training your shoulders with relatively low volume, you can keep doing it for weeks and weeks without accumulating a whole lot of fatigue, and you're growing the whole time. Why the fuck would you not do that? It's also really low injury risk. That's something else you have to integrate, is you could look back at your entire training career and you say, okay, I had 3 major shoulder injuries, and someone's like, if you trained from MEV instead of from the midway all the way up, you would only have 2 injuries. You're like, God damn, that would have cost me a lot less. One of those injuries took me out for 2 years. So at the end of the day, you can start at, sort of the midway point, but then it's difficult for you to answer the question of why aren't you getting the easy gains? That's a tough question to answer.
And actually, I wanted to revisit point number 2 that Dr. Mike was making about injuries there. And I think a lot of people just assume that because, MAV is this like pretty big gap of scores that you could be training at potentially, they just think like, well, why not just jump right into that? One of the problems you run into is that your muscles might not be conditioned to tolerate what were your MAV volumes before. And that's the problem that you run into, right? So you might be thinking like, oh man, doing 12 sets per week at MEV is lame. I was doing like 24 sets, earlier. Why don't I just jump in at like 20? It's like, because you're not used to doing 20 sets yet. You got to build up to that. That's an easy way, the most predictable way of giving yourself an injury, or at the very least prematurely overreaching a certain muscle group, or even systemically if it's a big muscle group. Hands down, huge changes in your training loads that is the path to victory if your goal is to be injured.
Excellent. Unfortunately, many people don't think that through. All right, DIY Kevin.
Got it.
Keven.
Kevin.
Okay. Question from Kevin is...
We'll see where this goes.
Stay calm, Dr.
We'll see where this goes. But I really don't like this question because...
I know.
Yeah, okay. We'll see where it goes.
The path to nowhere. Question, am I genetically ungifted? Yes, I'm just kidding.
In the brain.
I've heard I've heard you say that any stimulus for us beginners is adequate to grow muscle. Yes, some muscle. All right. I'm a beginner, male. I train 4 to 6 times a week, full body, squat, bench, deadlift, overhead press, rows, with adequate volume, 10 to 20 sets body part per week, and anywhere from 4 to 0 RIR, rep range between 6 to 15 and decent form. I'm eating 1 gram per pound of body weight and mostly clean foods. I've been gaining weight too, currently 190 pounds. In the last year, I've added 10 to 20% to my lifts, but I'm still tiny and weak. Estimate 1 RM, 140 pounds bench, 170 pound squat, 160 pound deadlifts. Why am I not seeing the newbie gains that you mentioned in your videos? I'm constantly trying to optimize my workouts and nutrition to fix any issues that I might be making according to your videos. It shouldn't be this difficult to grow as a beginner. I know I shouldn't compare myself to others, but it's really demotivating seeing other people put on size who don't train as often, who have pathetic form, and generally don't put as much effort or thought in their workouts. Could it be that I just won the lottery for crap genetics, or do you think I'm overlooking something? So we actually have a really simple answer for you. In the Hypertrophy Made Simple series, there's like an 8-point troubleshooting guide. It's one of the last videos. Go look at that and make sure you've got all that shit squared away. Another thing is go get your regular blood work done, which you should be doing once a year anyway, I think, as a normal, healthy human. Blood work's good. Like, you could be fucking anemic and really not know it, and your doctor gives you an iron supplement, and all of a sudden you're God 4 weeks later. So outside of those two things that come to mind for me quickly, I will say something sort of on a perspective of individual psychology here. You said, I know I shouldn't compare myself to others, and you could have stopped there. Look, man, we can all make that comparison. Like, and I'll go off on a little rant here. Like, people ask me, like, oh, you're this and that brainy asshole, and you're on special sports supplements too. How come you're not as big as this pro? I'll go listen to this pro. Well, that pro couldn't fucking barely tie his fucking shoes. He's that dumb. I could fucking learn everything he knows and then learn 10 times more just to make fun of him for it. But unfortunately, I don't have as good of genetics as the best people in the world. So, I have pretty good muscle building genetics. I'm fucking pretty jacked, but I could compare myself to a bunch of people, and Jared Feather, my roommate included, and feel shitty about myself. And the real question is, what is at the end of that road of sort of negative comparisons? There's nothing there. There's nothing there because there's nothing to do. If you compare yourself to someone and you could actionably do something to fix the problem, and the problem is worth it to you and it's worth the trade-offs, then there's something to do. But unfortunately, CRISPR, the genetic altering technique, is pretty rough still. Doesn't work all that great. Certainly that landscape has not been very well trotted out to enhance your muscle growth genetics. So for now, you really you don't really have a recourse. So that's kind of fucking pointless to even think. Like, do you ever think that maybe you're not as good looking as other people? I tend to be a rather intelligent individual. If I listen to Ray Kurzweil talk, I feel stupid. I could feel bad about that all the time. You're almost never going to be the smartest guy, the strongest guy, the best looking guy. How I got another one for you, Kevin. How big's your dick? There's a pretty good chance that, like, you have a bigger dick than me, and you've pulled your pants off in front of willing girls before. They're like, damn, that's what's up. And I've pulled my pants down in front of willing girls. Like, oh, we'll try to work with this. You know what I'm saying? We'll try to accommodate you, little bitch. Like, who knows? You never know who's got what and who's got. You may be a very kind, hardworking, awesome person who's just fucking awesome to be around. People are like, oh, Kevin, that guy's fucking. I wish everyone was like Kevin. Whereas that guy who's in the gym jacked is a fucking mentally ill asshole who's a piece of shit, and everyone wants them dead. There's so much more to this shit. You got the genetics. You got all you can do is try your best. If we were to say that, that you did try, quote unquote, everything or all the troubleshooting stuff, do you have pretty shit genetics? Yeah, they're fucking not the greatest. Do we know how much better you can get over the long term? No. When I started lifting, I was 100 pounds. I benched 55 pounds on the incline barbell press for 10 reps and failed. I was one of the weakest people in my entire class. Now I'm for sure the strongest person that probably ever graduated my high school, and all this fucking muscle shit. And it's just because I kept getting stronger over a long time. There was never a time when I was like, oh, wow, I have great genetics. It just kept going. You don't know if you're one of those people, because the mechanisms to get your initial conditions going are a little bit different enough than the mechanisms by which you actually improve, that you don't know. So what I would say is, you say you're training, for like what do you say, beginner? I say go a couple more years and see how it comes along. You may find yourself in a position in a couple years where you're like way stronger, have a fucking baller looking body, and you're like, man, thank fucking God I didn't quit or some stupid shit like that. Or in a couple years, you may find that like a friend invites you running long distance, and you're like, all of a sudden you like are basically at elite cross country level on your third try, and you're like, oh shit, I was designed for endurance. You can quit all this lifting bullshit and go have awesome fun and be recognized for being a ball endurance athlete. Matter of fact, James and I went to school There were some other PhD students that were also around. They were in a different program, but they were Ethiopian. And I watched an Ethiopian dude who was like 145 pounds staple himself with 135 in the bench over and over. He could not bench 135 pounds, right? But he told me that he never gets tired when he runs. I'm like, what? He's like one of the top ranked guys in the world in the 5,000, 10,000. Maybe you're that guy. So yeah, as it seems, your genetics might not be great. Go make sure you do really checking off all the lists. Give it a couple more years, couple more months, at least a couple more years, and see if you're still progressing. Progress is the name of the game. And if you don't like how you're progressing or you stall out way early, you can always think about doing some other shit and just lift for health 2 to 3 times a week and not worry so much about dumb shit that you're maybe not cut out for. You don't see me going to deaf poetry jams and writing, all kinds of shit that's outside of my scope because I'm just no fucking good at it. So no big deal.
Yeah, that was really good. So Dr. Mike and I tend to not like this question because the end game, as we already said, is ultimately like, what are you going to do even if you have shitty genetics? You're going to keep training and just doing your best because that's all you can do, right? You can't really change what the genetics that you have. So a couple things just to keep in mind also. I mean, adding 10 to 20% on your lifts is good. I don't know what world you live in where that's not good. That's solid progress,
right?
I mean, that will never happen to me ever again within a year.
For sure.
Ever.
Unless you juice to the
unless
gills.
I pick an exercise that I have never ever done before, right? And I just like happen to get really good at it. But that's not like me getting beefier. That's just me getting better at the skill of doing the exercise.
Or pick up a needle you've never done before.
Folks don't want to go down that road. But so just keep that in mind, right? Like 10 to 20% is like within the realm of beginner gains. That's pretty good. Like that's fine within a year. Yeah, that's solid. And then again, like we already beat this one to death, but the only reason why you might ask this question of like, do I have bad genetics for this activity is simply just the opportunity cost of doing the activity, right? Could you potentially be putting your efforts into something else that you're good at that brings you joy and satisfaction and maybe toning down how much lifting you're doing? As Mike said, you could just back off and do it for health, like maintaining your strength, your muscle mass, your bone and joint health, and then doing something else. Maybe you're good at soccer, endurance, rugby, kickboxing, pick something else, go for it, right? That's the reason why you ask this question, not so you can feel shitty about your efforts and what everyone else is doing, right? So keep that in mind. Do your best. If you find that it's not, the opportunity cost is not worth it based on the results that you're getting, then find something else that's fun to do.
Yeah. Yeah, 100%. Charles Austin's up next.
Got it.
Do you ever find that some of your lift numbers are staying the same or getting slightly worse from meso to meso, but your pump, progress in the mirror, and mind-muscle connection are all skyrocketing? I'm guessing my technique is just improving over time, so I'm performing weight with much better technique. Pump, progress in the mirror, and mind-muscle connection all skyrocketing. I've never gotten slightly worse. I have gotten slightly worse by notably willfully altering my technique for better SFR that takes numbers off.
I think that's what he's saying.
Yeah. So James, the troubling thing about his way of saying it is he says, I'm guessing my technique is just improving. You probably remember that. My question to you, Charles, is do you remember the eccentric? Do you remember trying to go down a little deeper? Do you remember trying to take a closer or wider stance? That kind of stuff should be like things at least somewhat consciously. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Though, like to his point, like, so if your lifting numbers, like the weight and or reps that you're getting are kind of staying roughly the same or maybe even going down, but you do find like all those other indices are going up, like you're getting better pumps, better mind muscle connections, you're probably, maybe not, but probably individualizing your technique in a more efficacious way, increasing your SFR. That's a good thing. Right. And I can definitely say that has happened to me, especially like I used to be like a butt squatter to the max. And it's taken a long time for me to build up my quads to the point where I can be more of a quad squatter. And as a result, my squat, I could squat a lot if I did like a fucking West Side, squat. And then my numbers all have been going down over time, but my quads have been getting bigger as a result. Right. That's a trade-off that you make. So if we're interpreting it in that way, then yeah, that is something that can happen. But I think to Dr. Mike's point, you don't want to just assume that is happening either. You want to document like what changes did I make? Did I try and control the eccentric? Did I take a slightly different stance? Was I moving my knees a little bit further out this time? Like you don't want to just assume that you're improving your SFR, though I would say signs point to yes.
James, can you give me 1 second to ask Jared a few questions about our plans for training, and I'll just be right back.
Okay. Do you want me to move on, or do you just want to pause for a second?
Just pause for a second. We'll get Scott to clip this out or something, or if not, it'll just be awkward for a second. Give me 1 second.
That's fine. We're just going to be awkward for a sec. So while Dr. Mike's dealing with some other stuff, hopefully you guys are enjoying the Hypertrophy book. I know we've gotten a lot of good feedback on it, and I'm glad a lot of people seem to be enjoying it. Would love to hear any of your guys' comments. So like a fun fact, for whatever reason, we don't see a lot of, if you guys are leaving reviews, we don't see them for like a couple weeks. I don't know why that's the case, but that's the case for the website. So I am really curious to see what people thought about the Hypertrophy book. So I'd be love to see if you guys want to leave some comments, just saying like, hey, these are things that I liked, or hey, these are things that were confusing, or maybe incomplete thoughts that we need to get wrapped up. Would love to hear it. And then if you guys aren't aware, Dr. Davis actually just released a book on habit building, which I think you should all check out. She's obviously my wife, Dr. Wife. It's some of it relates to exercise, but it's not a book directly about, like exercise and nutrition. It's more about like if you have behaviors and habits that you're trying to develop, what are like the evidence-based ways of doing so. So if that's something that tickles your fancy, especially now that we're in the new year, and I'm sure you've all probably set some New Year's resolutions, that would be a good one to check out as well. I forgot what the name of it is. I want to say it's like evidence-based habit building, getting shit done. Either way, it's on the RP website, so check that out. I was also just looking through our fucking YouTube channel. Did you guys notice that there's like 30 videos in between the last 2 webinars that we did? That's insane. Looks like Dr. Mike's back. I was just saying, I was scrolling through looking for the last webinar because we skipped a week, and there was like 30 videos in between the last webinar that we did. I was like, what the fuck?
Yeah. Off to a crazy start. And
I made
more to come.
I made some shameless plugs in the meantime.
Oh, sweet.
Yeah.
Perfect. All right. Now it's time for Riley to make a shameless plug.
All right.
Riley asks, how to determine the stimulus to fatigue ratio of movement when the pump and tension feels great for it, but there is little to no soreness the following day. This happens with certain pressing movements for me, and of course, with smaller muscle groups like delts and biceps and even triceps sometimes. And with progression being so small anyways on those muscle groups, it's hard to tell if movements are actually progressing or if I need to change them. Thank you. Well, progression should be really easy to tell because you can progress by at least a rep or at least 2.5 pounds or something every week or other week. So the progression thing should actually be, guys, remember, you don't need to add 20 pounds per week to your lift to see if it's progressing or not. Like one of my pet peeves, and Riley, not that you're doing this, James, you and I say that a lot. One of my pet peeves, and not that you're doing this, person's actually doing this, is when people are like, aren't compounds better because you can progress on them more? I'm like, what the fuck told you that? Like, I mean, physically you could add more weight, sure, but like relative progress to the lift, like can be done on any lift. So you can detect progression on small lifts. It's not a big deal. And determining the SFR, there's, if you look at our newly published, which I'm sure James already had the ability to plug, Hypertrophy book, there's literally like a formula for calculating SFR. And there's free YouTube videos on RP YouTube of how to calculate SFR. And you just rank your pump, rank your tension, and you do rank your soreness. But if the soreness is ranked at very low, that's how you rank it. And if you have another exercise that gives you decent pump, tension, and high soreness, you rank it as well, and then you see how it all ends up in the wash and the numbers compare, and then you maybe have 2 equivalent exercise. One gets you a shitload of soreness, but without a ton of tension perception. One gets you not much soreness, but with a ton of tension perception. And then you sort of say, oh, the roughly equivalent SFR, and I'll use one mesocycle, one the other. We're really looking for SFRs at the big differences. Like if you have an exercise that really does shitty pumps, shitty tension, no soreness, it's a fucking dog shit exercise probably. But or you're doing it wrong. Well, yeah, if you have one that has great pump, great tension, and great soreness, then you got a fucking winner, right? So you can compare it. Just 1/3 of the index. It's kind of like saying, how do I value a car for resale if it has really shitty like rims, but the rest of it's good? Like, well, you just integrate the value of the shitty rims in the car. It would be 25,000, but now it's 20. If you have another car with great rims but shitty everything else, maybe it's also 20,000, but the rims are 10,000 or something, and then the rest of the car is shit. So it's just all part of a bigger equation with the 3 other variables in it. James?
Yeah, that was really good. So I think Dr. Mike hit a really good point there, and you're looking for the big differences. So like when Mike was talking, the thing that first came to my mind was like, okay, if I'm looking at the SFR of like a hamstring or a posterior chain exercise, what we're looking for is like the difference between like a reverse hyper and an SLDL, right? That's something where you can go, oh, wow, that was a big difference. The SLDL, and I'm going to go on a limb here and say, I think for most people is going to be the better choice than like something like a reverse hyper, right? Not like, okay, what was my lateral raise versus my thumbs down lateral raise versus my 45-degree lateral raise? Like that's fine. You can do that kind of nitpick, but it's probably going to be roughly equivalent more often than not. So focus on like those big changes where you can really notice big differences in tension, pump, and even soreness to some extent. That's what you want to keep an eye out for. Not the like, well, I felt it a little bit more here, but I didn't really get sore. But this one I got a little bit sore. I didn't really feel. That's like, don't worry about it.
Another thing about SFR is like the main ways we use it is twofold. One, don't do shitty SFR exercises or alter your technique to make sure they're not shitty. So just good SFR is good enough because you have variation. It just gets you in the rotation. Like you don't have to find the best exercise because it's not the best forever. Another one takes over. And two, you use SFR to try to improve the per exercise SFR. Given that you were getting certain pumps, tension, and soreness, try to get better pumps, tension, and soreness from the same amount of volume by altering your technique, your cadence, your grips, so on and so forth. And then the SFR is super useful. But if you want like an exact, like if someone's like, all right, what's better SFR for you? Is it high bar squat or is it leg press? You're like, oh, I don't know. Like, who gives a shit? Are they both good? Yes. Are you trying to make both of them better? Yes. You're fucking golden. You know.
Solid. Yeah.
All right, winning the today's award for the most Jewish name on the podcast, Yaakov Reisner.
Okay, can I tangent really quick? So I've been doing a lot of the Amazon stuff for RP, and one of the funny things they have this like reoccurring restriction if you're trying to do like a paperback print. It just like every time you click on anything regarding the paperback, it's like no Yiddish. You cannot be anything in Yiddish. I don't know what
the hell kind of fucking racism is that shit.
I know every time everything I keep clicking and I keep getting this notification that's like, make sure it's not in Yiddish. And I'm like, God, okay, I got it. Fuck.
It's just one guy trying to publish in Yiddish and they're like, I hate this guy. Make this restriction.
Yeah.
All right. Yaakov Rosner says, what is the best way to get back to training after an injury requiring surgical intervention and prolonged rehab, for example, rotator cuff repair? Also, during the rehab process, is there any truth to the cross-education whereby continuing unilateral training on the unaffected side maintains strength on the uninjured side, even though there will be uneven hypertrophic changes? James, this is all you, buddy.
Yeah, so first and foremost, getting back to training after an injury, especially if you needed surgery, first thing, don't be a dumbass and think that you know better than your physical therapist. Do the physical therapy 100%. For the love of God. Just do it. 100%. And this is coming from a guy who blew his ACL and had the same ego problem that I just said not to do. And guess what? It cost me a lot of time. And I had two vastly different shaped legs for a very long time, which is not a great way to pick up chicks. Awful. Second of all, I think Dr. Mike did a really good video. Mike, correct me if I'm wrong. You actually did a video on rehabbing from injury where you walked through like doing the higher reps.
It's an RP strength podcast, and it is available on YouTube.
Okay, so check that one out because I think Mike beats it to death. And we've talked about this a couple different times. So, first step, do the PT. Once your physical therapist gives you the go-ahead to start doing resistance training stuff, they will tell you exactly what you're supposed to do. Once they cut you loose, right, then you can start following Dr. Mike's recommendations, which you can find in that podcast. But it generally involves going from like higher repetition, slow, controlled movements, usually single joint kind of stuff, and then working your way across the intensity spectrum of load and exercises that are more challenging. Over time until you're close to getting back to normal over the course of several months, maybe upwards of a year. There is cross-education effects, and there's actually some really interesting stuff on this. I was looking into this when I was working on the book that I'm working on, where the cross-education can not only help keep some of the strength in whatever muscles that you're having a hard time from a neurological standpoint, so it keeps like the actual neurological characteristics of strength, at least to some degree, but to a lesser degree, it actually can also maintain some of your muscle mass when combined with non-physical practice. So when you're actually doing, what's it called? Mike, what's it called when you're doing mental practice?
I usually ask you that question.
Visualization training.
Visualization training.
Yeah, when you're doing visualization training along with you like training the other side somewhat normally. it does seem to have an effect of not only preserving strength, but actually preserving a small, albeit a small amount of, you're definitely going to atrophy to some degree, but you'll atrophy less if you actually do visualization training and do cross education. I don't want to call it cross education training. All that is just training the other side of your body that still works normally. But yes, that is a thing. However, that is a very small thing in comparison to doing physical therapy. So do that first.
Yakov will tell you the name of the video you should go search. It is podcast episode 15, Developing Your Comeback Plan After Injury with Dr. Israel, and it's on the Clinical Athlete YouTube page.
Oh, perfect. Yeah, that's right up your alley.
All right. Jacob Kowal.
Going from Jewish to Polish.
Yeah, same name, actually. Literally the same name. It's like Jose and Joe.
Oh, wow. That is, I didn't even notice that.
Can you briefly talk about programming periodization for street lifting? Yo, motherfucker, we in the streets.
Am I the old fuddy duddy here who doesn't know what that is?
Yep. Luckily, he explained it.
Is that all it is? It's just one arm stuff? Is that all it is?
It's like pull-ups, chin up. I don't know what one arm squat is. I don't know what the hell that is.
Do they do this like in a powerlifting type competition, or
no.
I know it says street, but I'm thinking like you got a fucking squat rack set up somewhere.
I think the squat is a misnomer, but maybe not.
So I was thinking of like street, like, you know, when people do like the crazy street performances where they're like hanging, you know, perpendicular on trees and light posts and stuff. That's what I first thought. But now I'm like,
that's what I thought it was. I got to look up what street lifting is, but we'll take him at his word. 1 RM pull up, chin up.
Yo,
one RM
we got these squat racks up in the streets.
Yeah.
I'm trying to work on my 1 RM, dog.
I can't tell if he says 1 RM, but I can't tell if he means like a rep max effort, or if he really means 1 repetition max.
Because 1 rep max it sounds like powerlifting, more or less, just with different activities.
Yeah. So it's pull up, chin up, dip. That's actually kind of cool. Squat and 1 RM bar muscle up. Jesus, that's a fucking dangerous thing to do. But goodbye, rotator cuffs. I'm just kidding. I can probably work up to that. If it's too broad a question, then maybe James can do an episode for it. This is a niche sport. No one in sports science talks about. James, you can always do that if you want. But
if I can find this, I'll do an episode on it.
Yeah. So real easy beginning part of the question is going to be program periodization. That's almost identical to that for something like powerlifting. It's 1 RM period. Powerlifting periodization can just be called 1 RM periodization. It would be almost the same. Almost the same.
The thing is, like, aside from the muscle up, most of these are not the most dynamic movements ever. And then frankly, like the muscle up and the chin up is going to have a lot of carryover. Now, I'm not saying they're the same, but
and dip. Muscle up, just a chin up plus dip, add it together.
I mean, so really, like, most of these are pretty static in terms of like they're done with, if we're interpreting it as written, heavy load done really slow. And even the muscle up is going to be a little bit more dynamic, but it can't be that dynamic at 1 rep max. So the periodization is really easy because you don't have to do any power or explosive type training. It's literally just maximal strength training, powerlifting training. Just substitute these lifts instead of the power lifts. That's really it.
Yep, that's really it. All right, Vasil Zhelev.
Nice. I wouldn't have any idea.
With the RP logo. It used to be a picture of my fat face back when I was younger. Now it's the RP logo. Thanks for confusing everyone, Vasil. You've earned the title of Fanboy of the Year.
Woo!
No blowjobs come with that.
Supplements or something.
Yeah. Good God. Vasil actually has a very good question. He asks, this might cause some controversy, but here we go. After reading Dr. Helm's Muscle and Strength Pyramid and Dr. Israel's and Hoffman's Hypertrophy book and Jared and Mel, good God. I hate being a fucking muscle celebrity. Anyway.
Yeah, you love it. You love it, dirty boy.
Yeah, James, I love the shit out of it. There seems to be a myriad of differences between the two approaches. Now, Dr. Helms suggests for hypertrophy that only weight increases be made weekly for compound movements, while dropping a rep per set from the first to the final week in order to meet the target RIR, and only rep increases for isolation movements. All volume is held constant. While on the other hand, we know RP's approach with volume and mesocycle progression is, in this case, one more right than the other, or is Dr. Helm's approach more catered to strength progression because volume load on compounds is decreased each week substantially? So it's definitely more catered to strength progression. I'll give you that. Is one more right than the other? Well, we certainly think we're more right for about 5% of that. For the other 95% is just two ways of hitting a progression that result in basically the same thing as training pretty hard, a little bit harder on average over time, and making sure that you're always challenging yourself in a progressive manner. There's a lot of ways to skin a cat, and every single one of those pretty much make the cat miserable and useless afterwards. Skinless cat. But most of this is just down to like, Eric will just give an example. And a lot of the stuff RP does is really just an example. There's many, many ways to approach it that just concern themselves with the general principle. On applications, we do differ from the 3DMJ folks significantly in the fact that we do open ourselves to the possibility of altering set numbers per mesocycle. And if you're curious about an in-depth discussion of that, just go find myself, Brian Miner, Eric Helms, Jared Feather discussing on Steve Hall's Revive Stronger podcast, set progression or not set progression. And that's 4 hours or some shit of really in-depth nuance. At the end of the day, none of us really know for sure if set progression is better than static sets. We think it probably is better. They think it might not be justified or overcomplicating things. Not sure who's right. Tons of mutual respect both ways. Why don't you read the book, read their books, think about it in your head, which one seems to make the most sense for you. Try them both. Don't do extreme versions of either one, and then see what you think.
Yeah, I think Dr. Mike's right on that one. So I don't mind saying that I think ours is more correct. The thing is, like, you can get great results from increasing things like intensity, but at the same time, you can also start getting false positives where you might be thinking, you're looking at your numbers meso to meso, week to week, and you're like, man, I'm getting a lot of progression, and that's cool, right? But what are you actually progressing in, right? Are you just getting stronger, which is cool? But are you getting more jacked? Like sometimes some of the best blocks that you'll ever have in hypertrophy training, you might not see your numbers go up a ton until you do a resensitization cycle. And all of a sudden it's like, choom, why? Well, it's because your fatigue fitness balance has been diminished as a result of all the volume that you've been doing. So you're growing new fitness, in this case, strength, as a result of you gaining muscle mass over time. It's currently masked by all the fatigue that you have from doing all the hard training. And then all of a sudden, pachoom, there's actually in the hypertrophy book, there's a great example graph, and I don't remember which chapter it's in, but there's a graph where we kind of show, and I don't want to say an idealized, but we kind of said, like, here's an example of what progressing in performance kind of looks like across several mesocycles, and then here's one of progressing in volume. And what you find is that the end performance, like if performance is something that you're really interested in looking at, both of them kind of end on the same general note, except in one case, you're way more jacked than the other one, in theory. Yeah. So check that out if you haven't checked that out. I personally don't think there's a ton of debate here in terms of, because you can look at things like even just from a very simple like work capacity standpoint, like your work capacity starts low and goes up. Like there's a huge incentive to start low and build up as per your work capacity can tolerate right then and there. That's a really easy just kind of segue into why you might even have a volume progression at all. Why? Because you can't do 10 sets right now. You can only do 2, but later after a couple months, now you can do 10 sets. Why not?
Totally. All right. JR is up next.
Got it. Ooh. I can't see JR without thinking about JR from WWE. Like the guy who stroked out with the cowboy hat. Like, oh my God, you sick son of a bitch. Oh, hellfire, brimstone, stone cold, stone cold.
All I can think of is like a Lil Wayne song where he's like, I'm the Birdman, or you're the Birdman, and I'm the J-Ara, which I think means junior. Yeah.
Why are you listening to Lil Wayne?
What? This is a self-answering question because shit is dope. Straight mad fire, son. I
just didn't think that was your cup of tea.
Yeah, back in the day, it's like a high school memory. All right. Question. Hypothetically, let's say you're connected to ShamRV's 18 to 20 sets of 2 RIR, but 10 sets at 0 RIR. I feel like we've answered this before, but no, I think we talked about it.
I think we had a similar question. Yeah.
10 sets of 0 RIR. I did. You and I just talked about it because I saw it previewed. 10 sets at 0 RIR. I've noticed that a failure week given at moderate volumes can jack me up well after a deload week. What are your thoughts on the hybrid routine below so I can still benefit from RP style training? 5-week meso week 1, 12 sets of 4 RIR, 14. We didn't answer it on video. We just answered it ranting to each other. Unless we're redoing this whole webinar, which is no way that's possible, I hope.
I think you might have reposted the question.
Maybe. 14 sets, 16 sets, 18 sets at 4, 3, 2, 1 RIR, and then 10 sets at 0 RIR. This way you get the benefits of increasing volume and testing true failure once a meso without crippling yourself for weeks to come. By the way, the connective tissue issues were never a problem until I got into my late 30s and 40s. The other option is never go to 0 RIR, but I'm the absolute worst with guesstimating RIR. I need true failure at least once a meso, open to suggestion. So my best suggestion is don't go to true failure because it just seems that the stimulus to fatigue ratio is fucking dog shit for you. In that case, just make sure you're getting stronger over time. You don't have to worry about it. You go in true failure because you're challenging yourself with more and more loads. Like if you used to squat 300 and now you squat 315 for the same reps, it doesn't matter if you're going to true failure or not because you know the shit is grinding and it's pretty tough and you're making gains. Fuck it. If you really have like basically a 50% reduction in SFR, it's difficult for James and I to suggest that is worth it. What is it? I'll put it this way. Just a comical way of answering your question. What is it you think you're getting out of 0 RIR that's worth such a massive reduction in stimulus to fatigue ratio?
Not to mention the set reduction that he has to take in order to do that, right? So we're going from 12, 14, 16, 18, and then 10 sets at 0 RIR. Yeah. That's a really big drop in sets.
It is wildly unlikely that the hypertrophic outcome is going to be equivalent. 18 sets at 1 RIR is not the equivalent hypertrophy at 10 sets at 0 RIR under almost any circumstances. It's wildly, overwhelmingly likely that it's going to be like 1.5 times the growth at least. And so you don't have to grind it. You just never go to failure is my absolute best answer. If you do choose to go to failure, your method is absolutely really good because you're attending to the fact that like a certain amount of fatigue you just don't want to accumulate. Because if you did do 20 sets at 0 RIR, you'd be crippled for weeks, and that would be really the stupidest thing. So I think yours is the second best answer I would give. You may disagree, you may be correct, but I would say that the best answer is just to do week 5, 20 sets, again at 1 RIR, try to eke out one more rep here and there, or maybe 2.5 more pounds on the bar or something, and then just deload, repeat. I don't think it's worth it to go to 0 RIR as long as you're progressing.
I would also consider maybe changing your exercises. It sounds like your SFR choices from whatever you're doing is just shitty in terms of you shouldn't have this massive connective tissue limitation for any. I mean, sure, people are going to have I know for me, elbows are kind of a touchy one depending on what I'm doing. Everybody's got their own thing. But I mean, if it's just a consistent problem for you, I would say reevaluate the SFR of the movements that you're choosing and then the techniques that you're doing within those movements, because you might just be making bad choices. You might just be doing something that it fucks you up needlessly. For example, maybe you are doing kind of elbows tucked in on your bench, kind of like a strengthy kind of bench, and that just fucks your elbows up really bad. Whereas if you just mixed in some wide grip pressing or maybe some pec flies, cable flies, you're going to get a great stimulus and your elbows don't get fucked up as much. Those are things definitely worth entertaining.
Yeah, super. Last question of the day, Thomas Lee.
Tommy Lee.
Yeah. If Thomas Lee had a middle name, he would for sure be a guy who tried to assassinate the president. All right.
Thomas Lee Jones.
There you go. Jesus. What a great actor. A generational actor.
Oh, yeah.
Thomas, he asks, what does it mean if I am able to match performance, but relative effort increases in doing so? No increase in volume from previous micro. For example, 10 reps at 200 pounds last week, it's 3 RIR, but this week 10 reps at 200 pounds is 1 RIR. If I'm understanding correctly, this isn't a drop in performance. It's not a formal drop in performance, correct? But does the fact that the same work was harder mean that I'm slightly above MRV? It doesn't. It's not conclusive enough, but it probably means you're either having an off day or you're holding a lot of fatigue. Is this actually a performance increase since I did the same work carrying more fatigue? It might be, and this is what's fucked up. The fitness fatigue paradigm is confusing, and it's a little bit of like a quantum black box Schrodinger's cat sort of situation. And the analysis itself is disruptive to the system. So your best bet is to do a third week and see if you can go up again, actually not again, for the first time, and see if you can continue to APRs. And here's why James and I overwhelmingly recommend the match or beat rep progression and set progression system, which is, again, you can just YouTube that, what I just said, and it'll come up with an RP video explaining that. We do proactive increases in either 1 or 2 reps at a time or 2.5 to 10 pounds on the bar. You try to match your reps or the load, but the other reps or load, whichever ones you're not, matching, you try to increase. So you try mini PR every single microcycle. When you cannot do that anymore, it is a performance plateau, and you can be certain that your fatigue is too high. And then like if the plateau repeats itself or it goes down and you underperform, then you can be like, okay, I'm over my MRV for sure. If you don't push the pace, if you try to repeat the same efforts, it's tough to tell what's going on. Is it the fatigue rising? And is it really the underlying system? Is it really doing better? Well, almost certainly the fatigue is rising. It's highly unlikely you're losing fitness, right? So relatively speaking, that performance is not as impressive in the second week as it was in the first. But you can crinkle your mind up into a fucking trash can thinking what is what, how is how do we, what do I take from this? Because there is inherent uncertainty into that system. You can remove all the uncertainty in the world by starting at like roughly 3 RIR and just adding weight and or reps until you cannot continue to progress and then deal and repeat. Because everything in that window has a little bit of flux and mystery, and we can't quite tell what's going on until one of two things. One, just the beginning, we know it's roughly 3 or 4 RIR. We know we're in a good place. We know it's low fatigue. And at the end, we know when we can't keep going anymore. That's really kind of it. It's like if you have like an experimental plane that tests which the highest altitude it could go to, you can say, well, the first flight, it started to ring all these, error bells at 90,000 feet. And the second flight, it started ringing them at 80, but the controller felt more solid than it was at 80 last time. So here's the thing. If you have a great ejection capsule, huge assumption, just keep going until you fucking can't go. And then you'll know what the fucking top altitude is. Speculation, especially when you get close to the top, can be going either way. You don't get a lot out of it, James.
Yeah, really good answer. And so I'm going to give another answer, but I totally agree with the match or beat system. That's my go-to, as Dr. Mike said. So that's always what I would recommend. Just to give a little other suggestion. So one thing that you can also do, considering that you can have a really good training session, even if let's say you are kind of not really sure, you're in the same situation. Maybe you say, okay, I'm going to go up to 205 and just kind of see what happens. And maybe you get 987 instead of 1098. Does that mean that you had a really bad session? No, you probably had objectively still a pretty good hypertrophy training session. Are you necessarily overreached? No, you just increase the weight and maybe you're carrying a little systemic fatigue. You can still actually have a really, really great session, even if you don't always match or beat, especially if you increase the load anyway, right? So as long as, for example, if we're using the 5 to 10 rep range, anything within 5 to 10 reps is probably pretty good in terms of the session. Now, if you get up to 210 and you do one set at 9, okay, so that was less than 10, maybe not great, but it's still kind of in the ballpark. The next one is 5. The next one is 4. Right now, that's more of a sign that you might have actually been overreaching on whatever you were doing before. Maybe your fatigue state's not great. But as you add weight and you don't always match your beat, but you're still in the goal rep range and objectively things feel pretty good, still good pump, still good mind muscle, and you're not getting crippling soreness the next time, you're probably okay.
Yep.
This is just one of those things you don't necessarily want to, it's good to be thoughtful, but you don't necessarily want to get into that Schrodinger's box situation where you're I can't tell if I'm good or not. If you're not good, you'll know.
Yeah. In one training cycle, we're not good. Okay, fine. Just don't repeat the same problem over and over. If you have a training system which consistently leads to not good things, you can just overreach. Stop doing it. There's no nuance there for you because that's obvious. Whatever it is you're doing is not enough stimulus or too much fatigue or something like that, not enough nutrition. So find something that works fundamentally well, crank it, and over time, you should be hitting mini PRs here and there. That's why James and I are always baffled in a literal sense if we don't really know how to answer, of questions like, hey, we've been doing everything right, but I'm not making progress. What do I do? It's almost like a question of, hey, Jared, what is that philosophical thing where shit answers itself? The fuck's that called? Say what? I guess circular reasoning. Tautology. Tautology. It answers itself. It's well, if you're doing everything right and you're still not making progress, you're done. So the other things is maybe that's all you have genetically, or you're not actually doing everything right. So the answer to that question can be answered itself. It's okay, what I'm doing isn't working. Let me reevaluate to see if I can change some things. Because I think a lot of people have an attachment to certain ways of lifting. And they're this has to be the answer. We've a bunch of questions were I'm doing between 10 and 20 sets for my delts and they won't grow. What am I doing wrong? have you tried 5 to 10 sets? I'm like, well, that's not enough. Like, how do you know? Have you tried 20 to 30 sets? Like, well, that's too much. How do you know? And they could have good answers to how do they know, but they usually don't. And then we get an email later or like a YouTube comment later, like, hey guys, I took your advice. 6 months later, I have 5 to 10 sets for my deadlifts and they're growing like crazy. I was just overdoing it. And it's like, ta-da. So just do your best and don't get caught up in the weeds too much. Performance will end up in the long term telling you what you need to be doing.
Totally agreed. Was that it for today?
That's it, man.
All right, folks, it was fun getting back with you guys. Hope everyone's having a good start to the new year. There's already been some crazy shit going down, so I hope everybody's staying safe and healthy, and hopefully people are getting vaccines if they want to get vaccines, and everybody's rolling out the new year happy and healthy. That's my wish. Dr. Mike, any closing thoughts? Any fun announcements?
No fun announcements because it's 2021. There will be no fun. The new world order of... I don't even know what joke to make. SJWs and pedophiles and hard right conservative Trump nut jobs have all allied into this like Death Star of hate. And
oh, God.
The rest of us just want to go to work and play with our loved ones and families.
Yes. All right, folks. Well, great questions this week. Thanks for interacting with us. Make sure you subscribe to the RP YouTube channel. I mean, even within the last 2 weeks, there was like 30 fucking videos. Subscribe already. Jeez.
You're welcome.
You're welcome. All right, signing off. Talk to you guys next time.
Peace.